I'm very happy that you have all joined us. Thank you very much. I'm Laura Paul, Financial Services Industry Lead for Appian. And I am really thrilled to be sharing with you a really exciting initiative that Appian is collaborating on with the SWIFT network. I imagine that most of you are probably familiar with SWIFT. They are the world's largest financial messaging network. They've got 12,000 financial institutions and corporates sending 24 million or so financial messages every single day. So they have huge scale and huge reach. And in 2017, SWIFT launched its Global Payments Innovation Initiative, which is really aimed at solving the complex challenges surrounding cross-border payments transactions. So making them faster, making them more transparent with end-to-end trackability. And they've got today over $100 billion going across GPI on a daily basis across 1,200 country corridors and 3,500 financial institutions. So significant uptake at this point, and those numbers are continuing to grow. And as part of GPI, case management of payments investigations and exceptions on payments transactions actually rose to the top of the priority list for innovation enhancements for GPI by the member institutions. And so that is where Appian comes in. So Appian is going to be integrated directly into SWIFT GPI, facilitating case resolution on interbank payment transactions, basically from initiation to resolution, simple cases all the way through to complex cases, which is really Appian's sweet spot, something that Appian does very well. They're going to be operational, regulatory, compliance-related types of investigations, essentially anything that slows down the payment. There's going to be now an end-to-end case management, fully automated capability to really make sure that the customer experience is what it should be with these cross-border transactions, improve operational efficiencies, and get the real value from the platform. So where are we in the process? Right now, Appian is participating in a pilot with SWIFT. There are also 16 banks who are participating in the pilot at this point. And very importantly, and what I wanted to let you all know, is that there's opportunity for you all to join the early adopter program. So you can begin to, you can actually implement Appian Case Management, GCase as we've been referring to it, to improve upon your cross-border payments solution. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like and show you a little bit about that as well. And I invite you, by the way, please feel free after this session to reach out to me or reach out to your Appian account executive. We'd be really happy to share more details with you on this and talk about how you can get that implemented. So I am very pleased that Daniel Lynch from SWIFT is here with us today. Daniel heads up SWIFT's payments innovation in the Americas. Daniel, please come on up. And Daniel's going to share a little bit more about Appian case management, about GPIs, some of the background and reason that case management was so important and some of the benefits the industry is expecting to gain from this. And just before we get started, I also want to mention that Satya, who is Appian's solution principal architect, is also going to, along with Daniel, take you through a demonstration and really highlight some of the key features and functionality and bring it to life a little bit. So please welcome Daniel.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming to the session. Thanks for, I guess, after perhaps having a few drinks on the midway last night and maybe a very carb-oriented lunch, I would probably be tempted to take maybe a quick nap, but I appreciate you coming out to hear about this case management initiative today. I don't know how many of you are familiar with GPI? All right, cool, very nice. So the GPI initiative is basically a thing that we all decided collectively, SWIFT and about 20 of our largest GTBs about 3 years ago to undertake. There were a few currents happening in 2017. There was increasing competition to SWIFT, but SWIFT is really just a messaging layer on top of the correspondent banking system. We found that there were things like in China where the banks had lost maybe 100% of their retail payments to folks like Alipay and WeChat in the course of 3 years. And they were starting to be a little bit distressed about the possibility of losing the wholesale franchise, right? Additionally, there's these heightened customer expectations where You can order a good from Amazon, it's going to arrive the next day, you can track it, you can trace it, you can pay things instantly, and then suddenly you go to work, you're the same person that's doing this outside, and you want to send a $2 billion payment to Central Europe, and then suddenly you're shocked that it's lost or it's taking 4 days. And then probably cynically, lower interest rates probably helped us out a little too. But we got together with these banks and we decided that each year we would have a process where we would determine some marginal or iterative, sometimes larger revolutionary changes that we could apply to this correspondent banking model. I think we've been a little bit of a victim of our own success because a lot of people think this process, what's happening today, is GPI, but it's really what's live now. So these initial 20 global transaction banks in SWIFT 2025 got together and said, what's urgent, not necessarily like important, what do we need to fix like day one? And everyone said, of course, the fact that I can't trace a $1 billion payment is crazy. The fact that I don't know who all the players in this correspondent banking chain is wild. The fact that I don't have settlement finality always, so I'm not getting a confirmation that the end beneficiary has been credited. Of course, I don't have transparency on the fees that each player is applying, or the charges rather, let alone the FX rates. And then, of course, finally, that the speed, we wanted to have a heightened SLA where we could expect that all payments would be settled same day or same value date, right? And this was very successful. We've got, as mentioned, about a third of our network using it now in terms of participants. They represent about 80% of cross-border payments. We've been able to extend it out beyond the SWIFT network. The Fed participates with us, the clearinghouse, BACS, Bank of Japan, et cetera. So it's really becoming an end-to-end cross-border payment solution, not just for the SWIFT layer, but the entire initial ordering to end beneficiary process. Now, in the coming years, as we got uptake, it was no longer just these top 20 global transaction banks. We had a pretty large base, about 450 banking like corporations, sometimes with subgroups that are fairly independent. You can think about some of these very multinational banks with more of like a holding structure. So we thought, how is it that we can continue to improve this, but really take into account large banks, regional banks, development banks, investment managers, custodians, et cetera? And we decided to develop a process that's not dissimilar from like the presidential primaries. We have like the party primaries, and that's when we go to London and we go to UK and we go to Istanbul and we go to Shanghai and we get all the banks together and we decide, what have we not addressed yet? What's not working? Where do you still have pain points? And they have sort of the primary vote. And then in November, the top 30 GPI banks sort of have the general election vote where we decide what it is that we're going to develop the next year. In the 2016, we decided that we would build a few things, or 2016 rather, we decided that we would extend out a few things in GPI, going beyond customer credit payment transfers to cover payments. We decided that whether a payment passes through a GPI participant or not, it should be universally trackable. So we asked all SWIFT participants to begin to use this end-to-end tracking reference. And we developed an irrevocable stop and recall that would let you stop a payment in flight. And those have all been actually successfully uptaken. And I think last year, the primaries got a little wild, where people actually raised to us about 7 initiatives they wanted us to undertake this year. And these include things like a pre-validation API for verifying end beneficiary details before initiating a payment, having actual real-time or close to real-time corridors, so like cross-border payments in 45 seconds, 24/7, or at least 20/5. We developed a settlement layer for smart contracts for folks who want to use smart contracts on DLT, but maybe you're a little scared of tokens for FX or regulatory reasons, because maybe the SEC hasn't determined whether the securities or not. And one of them is actually this case management service. And it's funny, it was actually the winner of I took part in these primaries and in the general election, and it was consistently the most voted upon priority for us to build this year. So very excited to be building it. And I think especially salient is that instead of just building it with the banks and then going out to our solution providers, as we did in the sort of the first 2 rounds of this GPI innovation, we were very lucky to have Appian involved in the development process from day one. So it's very helpful to have the actual users and the providers, in the same room building a service together. So I think we can go to why case management? I guess why did everyone vote so much? In SWIFT, we did a survey. They said something like 2 to 6% of payments lead to an inquiry or don't have straight-through processing. I've heard John Hunter from JP Morgan, who probably, I guess, maybe is a little bit even more exposed to more respondent banks than we are, which may have more issues, has raised the number as high as 10% of payments having an inquiry investigation exception happening. And I think the big problem there is that they rise costs up to 25 to 35 times that of a payment with STP. So you can think about it, even if it's happening 2 to 3% of the time, these 2 to 3% of payments are costing you as much as the entirety of the rest of your transactional banking franchise that has STP. So we thought about, how can we start to address this? I think we found 3 major problems. Number 1 is that, first of all, you're playing telephone, right? So banks no longer hold direct messaging relationships necessarily with all the parties because of Wolfsburg, because of KYC, because of de-risking, et cetera, right? So on SWIFT, it's increasingly difficult to send the traditional inquiries investigation messages to the bank you want to talk to, right? You have your relationships are concentrated through major correspondence. If you got to reach the First National Bank of Daniel, which is a 4 or 5 bank branch in Arkansas, Daniel, I'm just making this a fictional bank. But if you have to reach them, you're going to have to play telephone, where you're going to have to send a message to your correspondent, who's going to send a message to their correspondent. It's just it's not a very efficient process. Secondly, it's very difficult to have like an audit trail of like when these cases were opened, when they were received, what you're doing to resolve them. And then number 3, they weren't structured enough. So we started to think about, we are the standards body for ISO 20022. And we started thinking about codifying all these things around, incomplete debtor name, incomplete creditor name, non-matching value dates, and hoping that in codifying them and working with solution partners like Appian, we could hope to automate some of these case resolutions. So again, we were taking a look at some of the larger issues, and again, incorrect settlement date, incomplete debtor, creditor information. We thought, there's 3 things that we'd really like to do there, and that's have the ability to identify a case, have to be able to route it directly to the bank you have the issue with, right? So if I have to reach out, I'm a mid-sized correspondent bank in Luxembourg, right? But I suddenly have to be able to reach out to a small community bank or credit union in Connecticut or in Arkansas or in wherever. How is it that I can reach out directly to them and get that information that really only they have, right? Of course, and then again, not just identifying and communicating them, but we also want to be able to modify and resolve the issues within the same case management tool. Is that pretty clear? Does that resonate with some of the issues that you're facing today? Cool.
Great. So clearly a need for case management within this GPI platform, and thanks for sharing that, Daniel. It's super helpful to hear how they kind of got to that as being one of the main priorities. And so Appian will be integrated directly into SWIFT GPI. It's going to be in-flight, cloud-based, allow for dynamic query handling between banks. So enabling them to resolve issues quickly. Again, they could be operational, compliance, regulatory type issues. It could be that there's missing information from the payment instructions or incorrect information in the payment instructions, which can throw off the entire payments transaction along the payments chain and just make it that much slower and that much inefficient, more inefficient. Standardized ISO 20022, as Daniel just mentioned. So Appian will be standardized so banks can exchange requests and responses in a structured manner, again, making that process, again, very, very efficient. And here, just another view of some of the key areas of value. I mean, all of the things that Appian case management does really well, we're going to bring to bear here, and add on everything else around payments, around reason codes, around the messaging, to make it tailored to this particular use case. But it will be, of course, right in Appian's sweet spot of case management, shortening time to resolve issues across the entire payments chain. Facilitating, automating, coordination of the entire end-to-end process, and removing the need for manual intervention. Daniel touched on this for a minute, but it's maybe surprising to hear. I mean, banks are going back and forth with faxes, emails, phone calls, direct messaging in some cases. And of course, every bank has their own process, right? So all of these things just really cause a lot of friction in the payments process. And this has been a long-standing problem for years. I mean, we've been talking about this in the payments industry for a long time now about fixing this. And so just having this case resolution, GPI is going a long way to fixing that problem. But when an issue comes up along the payments chain, which they're bound to happen, in fact, 2 to 10% of transactions, we need to make sure that all transactions are going through quickly so that customers are having a good experience and costs are kept down. And so it's just a good experience, all along the way. Creating visibility into details and status of a particular case, but then also the ability to aggregate data and also provide insights around patterns, case patterns. So perhaps there's a bad actor counterparty or a particular transaction type that's reoccurring. Having that view, and then having management view of key performance indicators, which would be helpful just in managing the whole process in terms of how many cases are outstanding, are they by a particular counterparty, and at a certain stage in the flow of that transaction. Centralized workflow, there's a whole laundry list. And again, I want to say everything that comes that's inherent in Appian case management will be brought to bear with this solution. And the ability also to integrate with AI to make the process smarter, the ability to append documents to the cases, all of those things. And really importantly, and I want to say last but certainly not least, is the ability to integrate with the financial institution's existing infrastructure. So this is not something that you all are going to have to go out and build this whole new process for. And I want to make sure to emphasize that, because this to me is really one of those, I am very excited about this whole initiative and very passionate about it, because I truly believe that this is really going to make a big difference for all of you and for our financial institution customers in helping you solve a real pain point, a real problem. Some of you may be involved in the cross-border payments processes within your institutions, or certainly know those folks who are. But we really think this is going to make a huge difference. So again, I invite you to please reach out. Would love to talk with you about how we can get started. It's the early adopter program, and it's ready now. So with that.
Perhaps just a brief word.
Yes.
Satya is going to do a pretty cool demo of how you would be interacting with this case management service within your interface at Appian. But just to give you an idea again of how this is working, we initiated this tracker such that initial ordering banks, intermediaries, and beneficiaries would have a full view into payments that were inbound, outbound, the finality on the outbound side, the fees lifted, et cetera, which was interesting. We get a lot less beneficiary claims non-receipt, or you do, and you can say, hey, go talk to your beneficiary bank because they're sitting on the funds. It's not my problem, right? We've seen a lot of white labeling of this too into customer portals such that they can self-service and find the status of their payments. There's also been some interesting things around once you're sitting on all this data, you can give them more routing suggestions. But with the case management, we decided that we could also use this tracker as a bus for routing these requests between the institutions. So you take intermediary institution again. Let's say it's a Portuguese bank, right? Or better yet, it's a branch of ICBC in China or something, right? You have an issue with this small initial ordering bank in Pennsylvania, rural Pennsylvania. I don't think that with the time zones they shared, with language issues, with having to route these, in this case, there's one intermediary agent, but we know that in reality, you can have 2, 3 sometimes, right? So in terms of intelligently routing the request to them, we're going to be doing that through the tracker, so you don't have to go through your correspondence anymore. You don't have to incur unnecessary RMA relationships and fill out more Wolfsburg surveys, which no one's a fan of. Of course, we're going to also try to and then also have an audit log, so you know who was the assignee, who was the assigner, who was the assignee. Of course, whether it's a person, whether it's a back office system, we want to have positive acknowledgments that the initial ordering bank received this request for, say, a person's date of birth. And then, of course, to reduce manual intervention as much as possible, we're hoping that in using these ISO 20022 codes and working with our solution partners, it won't be a question of somebody shuffling through files to find Daniel's date of birth so we can resolve this payment, but rather solving it in an automated and efficient fashion.
Oh, this is one thing. I actually added in this in here because I thought it was interesting. So these are participating banks, quotes around this. There was recently a big press release on this, and there will be a lot more information in the press, but Daniel mentioned earlier on that these financial institutions voted this as being the most important thing, the biggest kind of headache for them, really, that they see is managing these cases. And so I'm not going to read these, but just some quotes here around really the value that this is going to provide. All right, with that, Satya, you're up. We're going to show you a demo and bring some of this to life. Thank you very much.
Before we get started, let's get one important question out of the way. How many of you guys had a brilliant time last night? Good. All right. So with that said, I'm going to talk about how we went through the journey of using the SWIFT API to integrate seamlessly for both what I would call as the assigner bank, who is going to raise a transaction dispute, and the assignee bank, who are going to act on it, right? So there's two independent parties, totally two different banks from two different spectrums. How can they seamlessly collaborate using the API and the tracker as the backbone? Now, here is the biggest difference. Traditionally, if you use any of the standard DPM software that you might have come across, you will have to define what we call as a process for every step of the way. So that's pretty heavyweight. If something changes, you have to go and re-architect your entire solution. With Appian, given that we are both process and data-centric, we are actually taking advantage of the data that comes straight from the APIs, from SWIFT, and then piggybacking that, displaying it to the user to interact with that in an informed manner, connecting the organization's data, and then moving the ball forward, or forward and backward as it needs to go. So that's what you're going to go and see in this demo. Before I go through the demo, I just wanted to share what value this brings in. Right? I'm not a big slide guy, so I don't build very good slides. I build good demos, but not slides. So when I created this slide and show, I was just talking to my daughter. She's 10 years old. She looks at this and says, "Dad, you should have asked me. I would have done a better slide than you." So bear with me on those slides. I'm pretty much black and white. So the biggest value, I call it as the big chain. Now, given that Appian powers the entire end-to-end case resolution using the API, the advantage you get out of the box is that it allows you to connect with ease. So you can connect to not only the GCase API, as you're interacting with these systems, you need data from within your organization as well. So with Appian's platform, you can pull and push data seamlessly. The other thing is it allows you to resolve with confidence. So Daniel mentioned it very briefly, the full audit trail. So we can make the full audit trail visible to you all the time. So you know exactly who acted on it, what was done, and what was the resolution. And it will always remain. So you can go back and see what was done. And last but not the least, it allows you to gain full visibility. Now, in some part of the world, they call it as 360-degree view. Have you guys heard of the term 360-degree view? Yeah, you have. Right, so I'm not a big fan of that term. I tell you why. Have you ever thought how world will be if you can see around 360 degrees? You will have no idea whether you're going forward or backward, right? And now I would like to call it as 120-degree view and 360-degree awareness. So you need to know what's happening around you all the time, but you should be laser focused on what is happening next. And that's what you're going to get out of the box. This is step one. But in reality, the chain is big. The chain is so big that when you have this implemented as part of your entire solution of handling an entire dispute or payments or transaction, this is just part of the chain. So you might have additional functionalities coming in the future. So you don't need to run around looking for another product to implement. You can use the platform to evolve and add additional functionalities. It allows you to expand. It allows you to accelerate, because once you build, you can reuse those assets. And last but not the least, you can automate using both RPA and AI, which is part of our digital transformation journey. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to switch very quickly to show you how this gets realized. For the purpose of this demo, I'm going to play two roles. I'm going to call one as the assigner bank, the other one as the assignee bank, right? Both are powered by the Appian platform. Now, this need not be the case. A different bank can use a totally different technology, but Appian can act as both as you need. Now, I'm going to call it as the red bank and the blue bank. We don't want to name any banks, right? There are a lot of colors. So let's keep it simple. Red bank and the blue bank. So the red bank is going to be the assigner bank. So they are going to see the transactions and they are going to raise a dispute on one of the transactions. You will see how that flows down to the blue bank, which is going to act on the transaction, and then you'll see the exchange of information happening between the two, right? So as a red bank, I've logged into the platform. So what you see is an Appian example screen.
If I may, just to bring it back to the correspondent bank world for a minute, the red is the assigner, am I correct?
Yes,
Yes,
that's
so
right.
the red bank could either be a correspondent bank that's furthering a payment on for further credit, or it could be a beneficiary bank that wants to credit that end beneficiary but still needs some more clarity around an issue. And the blue bank would likely be an initial ordering bank, although it could in theory be an intermediary as well, because we see some cases in the US of larger banks aggregating on behalf of smaller credit unions and respondent banks, right?
Perfect, thank you very much. So once I log in, based on where I'm in the journey, I can see the list of transactions right over here. And the data that you see here is directly powered by the API. There's no process, there is no database Appian is storing that information. We are going to query the data in real time, okay? We are gonna allow you to search, sort, filter, do all those kind of things over here. Now, I'm gonna take an example. I'm gonna pick on one of the transactions from the top of the list for the purpose of the demo. Now, as I click on that, we are sending this request to the GK's API through the API layer and pulling all the transaction information in real time, okay? So what I see is it's a transaction. There are 3 participating banks in this transaction. So you can see the chain on the top. On the left-hand side, you can see the big codes and what they call as UETR, which is the unique reference that allows you to identify that transaction. And at the bottom, you see what this transaction is about. You see it is for $1,000. Its recent code is G002, and its status is ACSP, right? And as the bank need to have internal collaboration, we can also connect the people element to the process and data. So in short, we are trying to connect people, process, and data together, which in other software, you might probably need 3 components to connect them together. So if I want to collaborate, I can collaborate on this particular entity right over here. So to keep it brief, I'm just gonna create a new case. So this is where I'm initiating a transaction dispute. So when I click on this one, again, we go back to the APIs and saying, I need to create a new transaction dispute. And we are pre-populating most of that information for you from the transaction, such as what is the payment reference number, what is the message ID, and you can generate unique IDs as you need. So I can change this one to a message code of 107. Case identification is what the bank would provide to uniquely identify this particular case. Now, keep in mind, you can have multiple cases for a particular transaction. So you can give unique IDs for each and every one of them. In Appian, you can have Appian generate a code on its own. Just click on this key button and it will generate a unique code. Every bank will have their own concept on how you want to create this unique reference number. We can do the same thing, or you can explicitly specify a code as well. So I'll just call it as red2 for the interest of time. I can specify what the instruction is. And last but not the least, we follow the principle of get it right the first time. This is one of the core principles of like what I call as operational efficiency. Like, why do I need to go down the chain to identify a data was incorrect when I can validate and correct it right in the front? So here, what you're seeing on the screen are the different types of reasons for which I can initiate the transaction. So if I say a non-field related issue, the reason code is related to what I select. Now, if I happen to change the reason, I can instantly see a different set of code, making sure that you do not add an incorrect combination that costs you time and value down the chain.
Then we can think about how these apply a little bit to some real life situations. So non-field related, maybe I got a cousin and he's a carpenter and he lives in Miami, Florida, but his name happens to be like Nicolas Maduro, who's also like the president of Venezuela, who's under some sanctions right now. You may want to reach back and ask that birth date or some additional information to ensure that he is in fact the Nick Maduro who lives in Coral Gables and has his carpentry shop, right? It says non-field related. Once you get that clarifying information, you can know that he is in fact this pretty chill carpenter from Florida. Other ones are in fact field related. So these would be ones that are actually associated with the instructions in a payment instruction. And we think this is going to be quite powerful because you won't just be able to identify, but then also request to modify and complete. So if you have like incomplete debtor agents, so it could be like in the case of maybe it's just like Maria Sanchez. There's a lot of boats called Maria. They're all sanctioned. Maybe you want to get her second last name or some additional data. And once you get that, to be able to actually resolve the issue, you'll also be able to have a request that they can modify the 103 that's in flight and be able to send the payment on for further credit. So there's a distinction between field-related, non-field related, but we're hoping that they cover a range of issues. And I'll tell you a little bit at the end about why that's important, how we hope to work with you on building that out further.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah. So I'm going to follow up on Daniel's cue and create the reason as incomplete debtor's name and click on submit. So all we have done is created a screen which captures some basic information and push the information back through the API, the SWIFT GCase API, and let the API handle the case. So what has happened is this is pushing the data through, and over here I'm back into the dashboard and I can instantly see confirmation from the API that tells me what has happened. So this is a complete list of all that has happened within that API. So if I expand that, I can see that the transaction was created. Those are the first two lines. The third line indicates that it was assigned. On the fourth line, which stands DTAS, it says that it was successfully assigned to the target bank, or the target bank has
positive acknowledgement that the initial ordering bank, in fact, has received the case. So you know that they're at the very least cognizant and responsible for resolving it. Yeah.
Precisely. Mm-hmm. Now let's switch gear and go to the assigner bank and see what has happened from that point of view. If I go to the assigner's bank, so this is the blue bank, and first and foremost thing, the screens look very similar. For the purpose of continuity, we have kept it very simple, but it can be customized based on the target. What you see over here is my task list. So unlike a traditional task list, this task list is getting powered directly by the API. So there is no Appian process or anything that's powering this particular list. It's coming directly from this API, and I can see that there was one case and it has been assigned to me. This information comes directly from the API for us. So this is a very different paradigm to a typical process-centric assignment. This is assigned and owned by the GCase. So if they make any change, we can directly reflect that over here without you re-engineering your process. Now I'm going to go ahead, look into the details, and clearly the details will be very similar to what we saw earlier. And I'm going to go ahead and I can choose this case as mine, so take ownership of it, or I can forward this one to a different party. So in this case, I'm just going to click on it is mine. So I select as mine and click on accept. So accepting it again sends a notification to the API, GCase API, and the GCase API changes the status once again to accepted, as you can see it over here. And I can also see the tracker at the bottom that says that it's been assigned to me. Mine stands for the status is assigned to me. Now, the last step is to resolve this particular case. So the resolution can either be, you can close it with no further action, close it by taking a further action, or you can return the modified empty back to the bank with that information. So you have any of these combinations done, the system is going to ask you further questions based on what you choose. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to simply return the empty back to the sender with a modification. And once I'm happy with that, click on return that case. So now it is calling the tracker again, sending that information back to the red bank. Okay. So this is how the two banks can seamlessly collaborate together using the GCase API as the underlying bus backbone. Now, while we are here, I can also see the entire history of all the transactions that I have been doing. So the red 2, the one I created, you can see that on the top. So I can click drill down to see what has happened. It's not like fire and forget. You fire it, but it still has the handle for you to go back and see what was done. What is the status? Where is it currently residing right now? And since all these transactions are now flowing through Appian, We now have the power to combine the data that the tracker provides us with the data that is existing within the organization and slice and dice it in the way that is most meaningful. I can create cross-payment transaction reporting that tells me what is my transaction reporting happening. So tell me year over year, tell me month over month, slice it by region, by country, or by volume, or by revenue. So I can go by on historic basis. So I can say, show me the trend for the last 3 years, select the multiple years, and then I can see the trends. I can see them by total revenue. So how much revenue am I creating? If I don't want a couple of regions, I can deselect them directly, standard out-of-the-box functionalities. I can also hotspot various transactions, like tell me the regions which are creating or a lot of transactions are flowing through, should I wish to do so. All those things are now becoming visible straight out of the box. Now to conclude this case, if I go back to the Red Bank, I can see that the transaction has come back to me. And now I can specify what I want to do with the transaction. So I can close it because I've received the modified empty. I can close it, or I can take further action and reject this particular empty. So for the purpose of the demo, just to wrap it up, I'm just going to say modified empty was received. Everything is good. Conclude the case, and that concludes the end-to-end lifecycle. Just to recap, putting Appian as a case layer on top of this API, we are now able to take full advantage of the Appian's dynamic case management capabilities by taking advantage of treating data, people, and process as a first-class citizen. Now, at this moment, I would like to hand over to Daniel to wrap it up.
Yeah, so I guess if there's anything we could leave you with is that Swift has changed a little bit how we roll out some of these initiatives over the past few years. Before, perhaps we were a bit perfectionist, where we wanted something to work and cover a variety of use cases, or we wanted something to be absolutely perfect before we released it to market. What we're trying to do now more often is to take a look at what things can we address that are very urgent, that are blocking issues for institutions, and then roll out additional improvements as per necessary with the experience of the community. So for now, based on the pilot, these are the cases that we've identified that we think could be useful in case resolution. Anyone who wants to join the early adopter program, I invite you to join us in Swift and Appian to try it out. The goal is by the end of this year that these will cover 95% of cases. If they don't, you see we have a narrative generic code. If we find that we're not reaching that 95% level, we're going to go and incorporate into new use cases so that we can hopefully address 95% of these case management, right? I guess it's more of a horizontal look, but then additionally, as we move forward, we're also going to try to go into some other case resolution sort of vertical, sort of like claims management or invoice reconciliation. So hopefully, with these early adopters, by the end of the summer, by autumn, we will have enough of these ISO 20022 codified cases rolled into the API, consumed by your back offices, such that we can eliminate about 95% of these cases. And then concurrently, we want to begin exploring with you what we can do around claims and other things around invoice, PO, reconciliation with underlying payments. So thanks for listening, and certainly hope to be working with you all on this in the coming months.
Yeah, thank you all. I really think there's huge opportunity around this. So again, please reach out. We'd love to talk to you more about it.
Oh, one very important detail from the Swift side. We need network and network effect and capillarity. So no banks will actually have to subscribe to the service until 2021. So feel free to play with it and perfect it with us over the next 16 months, 17 months. So looking forward to that, yeah?
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.